So meanwhile, and this was kind of what I was alluding to earlier, Richard Stanley was still recuperating near, and so he actually got back onto the set as an extra with a Dogman costume. There was a story in the documentary about how, they would take their breaks for lunch or whatever, or probably to wait for Marlon Brando to decide to come out of his trailer. And, it would be like sweltering heat, so everybody else would be taking off their helmets. And that first AD who Vincent had mentioned, I think, is the one who said, like, he noticed this guy with the dog costume on who just, like, wasn't taking the helmet off, even though they're in this, 110-degree heat or whatever. And because obviously he didn't want to reveal his identity and that he was, infiltrating this.
That's hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
who's the psycho who keeps his dog mask on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Podcast. We're your hosts, Matt Levine.
And Vincent Hannum.
And we're talking about all of our favorite monster movies, the good, the bad, and the downright campy, and asking if they stand the test of time.
Traditional kaiju creature features, space invaders, the supernatural, and everything in between. All strange beasts welcome here.
Camp Kaiju is sponsored by Zach Linder and the Zach Pack, powered by Coldwell Banker Realty, your source for real estate, home rehab, fixing and flipping for investor clients, and residential buyers. Reach out to the Zach Pack today for real estate services, follow the Zach Pack on social media, and contact the Zach Pack for investment opportunities. Link in the show notes.
On the sixth day, God created man. On the seventh day, he rested. And on the eighth day, in the year 2010, in a remote laboratory, an exiled scientist created something impossible. Unmistakably human. Undeniably animal. On the island of Dr. Moreau.
I'd like to present my children.
Father?
Oh my God.
From director John Frankenheimer. H.G. Wells' most terrifying creation. About the line that separates man from beast.
What's going on?
And the notorious doctor who dared to cross it.
We are men because the Father has made us men.
Marlon Brando, Val Kilmer, David Thewlis. The Island of Dr. Moreau. Directed by John Frankenheimer.
Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us. All of you Frankaholics out there will be very excited. Frank Olson is back on the show.
Woo!
Yeah.
Hello, Frank. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Was the last episode that you joined, was that Attack the Block? I'm trying to remember.
That was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back in December, I believe that was.
Yep. Well, the last regular episode, anyway. I was on the year-end thing as well. But yeah, the last one where we went over a specific movie was the Attack the Block one.
Cool. Always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Tonight, we are going to be talking about a movie with a much more difficult production history than Attack the Block had. Tonight, we're talking about The Island of Dr. Moreau from 1996. It's going to be a doozy. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I won't say that yet, but I'm very excited to talk about this movie.
Yeah, me too. I had always heard about this movie. I did not realize how deep the rabbit hole went with the troubles. Like, that's an understatement. I was watching this movie, and I won't get ahead of myself, but like, that's going to be our whole episode. Like, just chomping at the bit to talk about all the trivia with this movie, because it was a mess. There's so many factoids and bits of interesting info on this film and the people involved.
Yeah, the other day I was reading the Wikipedia article on it, like before I rewatched the movie, and I texted Matt and I said we could probably just like read the Wikipedia page verbatim, and that would be a good enough episode. So,
And I mean, there's a lot of that Wikipedia page on the show notes for tonight. So that's in essence, that's kind of what we're doing. But also, there's a bunch of stuff from that. A really good documentary from 2014, Lost Soul. I can't remember the full title. It's kind of a long title of that movie. I think all three of us saw it. But
yeah, I've got it pulled up here because I knew I was not going to remember the full title either. But it's Lost Soul: The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau.
so much fascinating information in that documentary, and we'll be talking about some of the stuff that I think all three of us learned from that documentary tonight as well. It's not too much of an exaggeration to say the Island of Dr. Moreau might be the most problematic or troubled production history of any Hollywood movie ever made. It sounds over the top, but it's close to being accurate, I would say.
Because what I learned, or like what I just realized, was that bad movies, when I feel like after watching the documentary and you're listening to the producers at New Line Cinema back in the mid 90s, they were so deep into production, they realized they were going to lose so much money if they did not go through with this. And they knew it was going to be a train wreck. But I feel like that is the exception, right? I mean, most movies that come out are decent. They might be boring, but they're not bad the way, or they're not in shambles the way I think Dr. Moreau is in certain points. So it's really interesting that this did manage to get made despite everyone knowing it was a disaster.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, it at least is like interestingly bad. I mean, like there are some movies out there that are just kind of like boring and bland and forgettable. And like maybe like 2 days after you see it, you forget almost all of it. This is a movie that I will never forget. It's so bizarre. It's like really off the rails. And I would kind of rather have a movie be interestingly bad than just bland and forgettable, you know? So I guess that's one thing the Island of Dr. Moreau has going for it.
Yeah.
I also liked that you called it the Troubles before. I feel like from now on, that should not refer to Northern Ireland and its history of terrorism. It should refer to this movie instead. That's how I'm going to use it from now on. I'm also sad that you were wearing the ice bucket hat at first, Vincent. And I know most people listening can't see us on screen right now, but you don't have the ice bucket hat on anymore.
All right. I'll put it back. It's just a couple of sheets of construction paper I taped together.
And a bunch of ice that will slowly leak over your head throughout the recording, I hope.
Of course.
Before we get to that, just a couple, quick intro things to get out of the way. Frank and I actually together a couple days ago saw a new monster movie in theaters, Death of a Unicorn. Frank, what'd you think about that movie?
It was not very good. I think I actually nodded off a couple times in the theater while we were watching it. Did not really work for me as a horror movie or as a comedy. And it's for a movie with such an eccentric concept, it's like shockingly bland and just kind of plain, I guess. Like there's nothing really like interesting about it. I don't know. It just didn't do anything for me.
Totally agree. I strongly disliked it. I feel like in addition to not working as a horror or a comedy, it also doesn't work as satire very well. And like the CGI is as bad as like the brief CGI that we get in the Island of Dr. Moreau, even though we're like 30 years later. So, Death of a Unicorn, not recommended by the Camp Kaiju crew. Vincent, have you seen it yet?
No, I was curious. So I like that you guys saw it, and now I know to not watch it.
Yeah. That would be my recommendation. Real quick, have you guys seen any other good new or older monster movies recently?
So many. I'm going to keep it brief. I've just been on a Lon Chaney kick. Lon Chaney Sr., if you all get a chance to watch his Phantom of the Opera, it is a good time. And, I'll keep it short and sweet, but that's my rec for the week.
A classic.
Can't go wrong with Lon Chaney.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I've seen a particularly like good monster movie recently. I did see, so last year I saw, I never exactly sure how to pronounce this. I think it's Dimogene.
Mm.
It's like a weird like combination of samurai movie and kaiju movie, and they made three of them that they filmed simultaneously. Last year I watched the first one, and then earlier this year I watched the second and third ones. And those are pretty interesting. They're a little bit too slow paced in my opinion, and for anyone, listening to this who just wants to see like the kaiju destruction stuff in all three movies, that's basically saved for like the very end.
Hmm.
Like there's a giant statue of a samurai that eventually comes to life. Like people pray to it, and like people who are like oppressed pray to it, and then ultimately like agree to sacrifice their lives to the statue, and then he like comes to life and gets all this, righteous vengeance on the like evil samurai who are the evil samurai clans who are like, abusing the people and everything. But those are all pretty interesting. I like the third one the best. And the third one, the protagonists are like these children who are trying to like, climb up the mountain to visit the statue and like pray for him to save their parents. And so that kind of gives them a little more of like a boy's adventure vibe, which sets them apart a little bit from the other movies. So that was my favorite of the three.
The third, it's called Daimajin, right? Daimajin, something like that?
Yes, that's how it's spelled. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced, but
Okay.
yeah, something like that.
Okay. I've always been curious about those. It's a good reminder that I should watch them at some point.
Yeah, I haven't seen them either, but I have been thinking about bringing one or all of those to a future installment of Camp Kaiju. So,
Yeah,
listeners, stay tuned.
definitely worth checking out.
Perhaps for next season. We shall see. One thing I feel like we should say before we get into tonight's episode about the Island of Dr. Moreau, one of the main characters is played by Val Kilmer, so we have to say rest in peace to Val Kilmer. Just died about a week ago. I've been starting to like dive back into some of his movies. This might sound a little bit weird, but I'm very excited to rewatch MacGruber, the SNL like parody movie, which is hilarious. I love that movie. And Val Kilmer plays the villain in that movie, so I'm excited to rewatch that.
That's right. I also want to say that Val Kilmer's reputation in The Island of Dr. Moreau is pretty bad. Like everyone he worked with on that film has nothing good to say about him. So with that said, like still rest in peace, Val Kilmer. You're a great Batman. You're a great actor, even if you weren't in this movie.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. We'll probably say some negative things about him tonight, like through what other people have said about him, but still an amazing actor with a long, great career, and hopefully how much of a difficult actor he was on this movie doesn't overshadow his long career.
Yeah.
And definitely his performance in Top Secret is one of the like all-time great like deadpan comedy performances. He's really funny in that movie.
I heard that I haven't seen that movie, Frank, but that makes me think about a quote. I forget who said it, but in the wake of his passing, someone said that he was a character actor trapped in a leading man's body. And I find that really interesting as an actor myself. Like you get put in these boxes, but maybe that's not your true calling. Maybe he thrived in the character space, but he was too good looking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's some of the like discontent that he experienced while making the Island of Dr. Moreau. Who knows? Maybe that was partially a result of that.
Yeah.
But Top Secret is great. I agree with Frank. That is a hilarious movie, and Val Kilmer is awesome in it. So if you haven't seen it, Top Secret and also MacGruber, 2 recommendations.
Okay.
So before we dive into tonight's episode, just a quick intro. Thank you all again for hanging out with us. Please rate and review Camp Kaiju wherever you listen. You can also send us listener comments at campkaiju@gmail.com, at our Instagram page at camp_kaiju, or if you'd like to be a featured voice on the show, leave us a voicemail at 612-470-2612, telling us about your favorite monster movies and memories. Please also check out our website, campkaijupodcast.com, for more reviews and special content. We also have merchandise available. I think some new shirts, maybe not so new anymore, but some shirts and other exciting things available at campkaiju.threadless.com. Really cool designs on there, so check that out if you haven't seen it yet. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/campkaiju for discounts, priority comments, and access to any live events. Thank you to our current patrons, Jason, Chris, Sean, Peggy, and our anonymous patron. We really appreciate you so much.
Yes, and if you are all local in the Twin Cities, join me and Matt Monday, May 5th at Indeed Brewing. We are going to be co-hosting as special guests with Naomi Osborne, friend of the pod, who hosts a movie trivia on the first Monday of every month. So it's going to be a Camp Kaiju themed monster movie bash type of trivia. We're very excited. And if you are not a patron, then you have time to join and you get a free drink on us, alcoholic or not. If you're not in the cities, we're still going to send you something, a freebie. So just pay attention to your inboxes. I'll be messaging our patrons between now and then. Yeah. And see what kind of free merch you want. Happy to, pay back what you're giving us and just show our appreciation.
Indeed. I'm very excited for trivia. Maybe there will be some Island of Dr. Moreau questions. Who knows? I feel like we're experts at this point.
That'd be a good idea, though. Like tie it back to a couple of recent episodes.
Yeah. And see how closely people were listening, I'm very excited for that. And then on our next episode of Camp Kaiju, we're talking about Invaders from Mars, which, Vincent, you're bringing to the podcast.
Yeah, early, underrated yet seminal science fiction work from the early 50s. It's in Technicolor. It's about a little kid whose world is turned upside down. His parents are like brainwashed by Martians. The town it's like maybe Invasion of the Body Snatchers type of situation, but it's told through the point of view of this like little 10-year-old boy. It's great. It's on Tubi. Everyone should check it out in time for our episode on that.
Cool. I can't wait. Frank, have you seen that one?
I haven't. It sounds interesting though. I've been meaning to like keep up with you guys and to kind of watch the movies ahead of time of when the episodes come out, and I've failed horribly at that. I just finally got around to watching Beast from 20,000 Fathoms earlier this week, actually. But
nice.
So I'm catching up very slowly to where you guys are at.
Well, plenty of time to catch up. We'll have, I think, a little bit of an off time over the summer, so plenty of time to watch all the movies from this season before the next one.
Yeah.
But again, tonight we're talking about the Island of Dr. Moreau, so we can talk about our personal histories with that movie a little bit. Frank, before we started recording, you were mentioning that you remember seeing it in theaters when it came out in 1996, and you were like one of the only people that actually liked it around that time, right?
Yeah, so I would have been 12 years old. I remember I saw it with my dad, and yeah, I remember I really liked it. I think at that age, I just like anything that was like weird. I liked for the most part, so that probably helped. But yeah, I remember just thinking it was like really exciting, and I remember thinking at the end that there's a part at the very end of the movie where it's kind of like a montage of like documentary footage of things happening, and I was like, "Whoa, this is so deep!" Like, I will say I was more impressed with it at age 12 than at age 41, but. But yeah, I liked it at the time, but I also liked, like the Street Fighter movie and stuff like that from roughly around the same time. So can't trust my taste from when I was a little kid, I guess.
Oh man, we all have movies like that from our youth.
Yeah, I remember liking Speed 2 Cruise Control when I first saw it when it came out. And it's, watching it again kind of recently, it's not terrible, but that's definitely not a good movie. That's the first one that comes to mind where, like, when I first saw it at probably, like, 13 years old, whenever that came out, 14 maybe, I was like, oh, this is the best action movie ever, which is not true. So I think all of us can relate to that kind of thing.
Well, for me, it's the Ben Affleck Daredevil from 2002. I loved it so much. I dropped $20 at the local CVS to buy that full screen edition DVD.
Wow, totally immersive flashbacks of the early 2000s right now. That sentence just brings it all back.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Vincent, had you ever seen The Island of Dr. Moreau before?
No, but I love this story. I'm in 6th grade. Speaking about our youth, I fell in love with H.G. Wells' writing and his science fiction, and I consumed all the stories I could of his. And The Island of Dr. Moreau always stood out to me even then. I reread it recently in prep for this episode, and it's a quick read. It's really dark and twisted, more so than like War of the Worlds or The Invisible Man. other Wells titles. So it's definitely in line with this movie's aesthetic in terms of like weird animal human hybrids. But also I love the early 30s adaptation Island of Lost Souls, pre-code horror film that, you know, is better than this 96 version. I think it's more atmospheric, it's sexier, it's weirder in just like an old-timey way. So so everyone go check that movie out in addition to the 96 adaptation.
Yeah, I actually just rewatched Island of Lost Souls in preparation for this too. And yeah, absolutely 100% agree with everything you said. Especially the part right toward the end where the beasts started. There's like the close-up montage of all the different beasts as they're like, you know, about to tear Dr. Moreau apart. It's a great scene.
Yeah, Charles Laughton in that is just steals the show. He's so powerful in that role.
He's a great actor. I love him. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I feel like the element of bestiality that's strongly implied by the Island of Dr. Moreau is even more pronounced in the Island of Lost Souls. It's like, you know, suggested anyway, but like in the pre-code era, I feel like that was kind of shocking and still kind of feels a little shocking today. So totally agree. That movie's amazing. More successful than this one for sure. But there was also a 1977 version of Island of Dr. Moreau, which is not supposed to be very good. But the cast has Burt Lancaster and Michael York, so I'm kind of intrigued by it. But
I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah.
Sorry, big Lancaster fan.
Totally.
Yeah, I was actually considering trying to like find that and watch it before this. I just kind of didn't have time, and I don't know if it's really easily available to find. But it does seem like the reputation of it is just that it's, you know, kind of forgettable, nothing special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard as well. And kind of like Vincent, I had never seen Island of Dr. Moreau from 1996 until recently for this episode. I'm just always very compelled by stories of like really difficult productions and like clash of egos on set and like how all those kind of obstacles and hurdles kind of like give shape to a final film is always really fascinating to dive into. So I'm excited to do that tonight.
Andrew Braddock, shipwrecked and cast away on a land beyond human experience. A world inhabited by sounds and shadows. The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Morning. We haven't met, officially that is. I'm Dr. Moreau.
Andrew Braddock, sir.
Has he come for your work?
No. Just till the next ship arrives.
The island was a Garden of Eden, a tropical paradise, and a trap. Because here, a bizarre civilization was growing.
What happened, Mr. Braddock?
Well, those creatures, what are they?
You go back to the compound, that way.
What were they? What were they?
This is human. This is man.
Understandably, they fear this place. The pain they've suffered. And when they revert, they bring back into their brute lives the memory of that experience. Their human legacy. You will explore that in the battlefield and bring back the knowledge. The ultimate knowledge. No! See? You see? It's happening already.
No! No! No!
You are an animal.
This is the chillingly prophetic story of the genius who tore down the walls that separate man and beast. Burt Lancaster, Michael York, Nigel Davenport, Barbara Carrera, Richard Basehart, and the incredible humanimals that populate the Island of Dr. Moreau.
We can start by diving into the crew of the film, which will be a little bit convoluted because there was a lot of turnover. We'll just say that right up front. The credited director is John Frankenheimer, who I think is kind of an interesting director. He made some really good classic films from like classical Hollywood as it was turning into like the new Hollywood era. Manchurian Candidate, Seconds with Rock Hudson, The Train, all those are really good movies, I think. And then he kind of went through like a period of critical downfall, I guess you could say. And before he made Island of Dr. Moreau, he had made a lot of bombs in a row, kind of poorly received movies. He did make some TV movies that are supposed to be good that I haven't seen for the most part. But he's an interesting director who maybe was not at the height of his talent or at least his fame when he made The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, and in fact, it sounds from the documentary about this movie like basically the reason he took it is because nobody would hire him for anything else. Like he wasn't really particularly interested in this, but and didn't like the script once he read it, but he kind of had nowhere else to go, I guess.
Yeah, needed a job.
Yeah, totally. I think it's kind of interesting that this movie probably mostly sent him even further down the A list to like the D list or whatever it would be. But I think like one of the movies he made after this, Ronin, the action movie with Robert De Niro, is actually really good. It has some amazing car chases. So Frankenhammer made at least one good movie after this one, in my opinion.
All right.
The initial director who was slated to make The Island of Dr. Moreau, however, was Richard Stanley, South African filmmaker who was kind of up and coming at this point in his career when he seemingly had the green light to make The Island of Dr. Moreau. I'm curious, have either of you guys seen any of his other movies besides this one?
No, to be honest, I'd never even heard of him prior to, reading the Wikipedia article about this movie and then watching the documentary about the making of it. He seems like an interesting guy, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting character. I had actually seen Color Out of Space in 2019 when it came out, and he was just another name. I didn't know who he was, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that he had been working in the 90s, and Moreau was his baby. It was his brainchild and his passion project. And as we'll get into, obviously, later, Moreau just kind of burned him so bad that he disappeared from Hollywood for decades, and Color Out of Space was kind of his comeback, if you will. Mm-hmm. But his other movies, Hardware and Dust Devil, look really interesting, and I am very eager to find those at some point. Yeah. I have seen Dust Devil, which I like quite a bit. It's very messy, it's flawed. I think the storytelling is not really very sharp at times, but the visuals are incredible. The sense of tone is really amazing throughout. I really like that movie a lot. I've never seen Hardware, and I want to. It looks great from the little bit that I've seen from it. And Color Out of Space is fantastic. I love that movie. Nicolas Cage is in it. It's a great Lovecraftian horror movie. I remember seeing it in 2020 during COVID lockdown, and it seemed kind of appropriate for that time. And it's kind of crazy to think that Richard Stanley, after the debacle of Island of Dr. Moreau, the next feature that he made was Color Out of Space, 25 years later. So he definitely took a long break from filmmaking, although he made some shorts and music videos and documentaries, but no features during that time. Can't wait to talk about Richard Stanley, because he as a person involved with this film is as weird as the movie itself. I think he is the source, for good and bad, of all the drama that happened with this film.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around, I think, for sure, but yeah, it's not it's easy to understand how he might have alienated some of the cast and crew and not been able to deal with Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer and their massive egos on this film.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like Richard Stanley kind of was screwed over during the making of this movie. But,
oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm Team Richard Stanley.
Yeah.
But, I think he, based on what I have heard and read and watched, he was out of his depth. It just didn't know how to handle a studio picture coming from the indie background.
Yeah, there was a guy in the documentary, I believe he was the production designer on the film, and it seemed to me like his account was trustworthy, because it seemed like he was very sympathetic to Richard Stanley, liked his vision for the movie and everything, but he also says it seems like he couldn't cope with the necessary meetings where he would convey his vision to other people. Yeah. And all of these other things you'd have to do on a bigger production like this. So it seemed like, from that guy's perspective, at least, it seemed like he liked Stanley, but definitely felt like he was out of his depth with it. So
Yeah. And it seems like he would have been out of his depth on, like making that transition to like a big budget Hollywood movie would have been difficult no matter what. And then for it to be just like the most difficult Hollywood production of all time, and these like crazy diva actors doing ridiculous, insane things, like the odds were stacked against Richard Stanley for sure.
Yeah.
There was kind of a convoluted writing process as well. The initial draft of the screenplay, Richard Stanley co-wrote it with Michael Hare, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Really interesting guy. He wrote the novel Dispatches, which is seen as one of the most powerful Vietnam War era novels from an American writer. Hare also did contributions to the Apocalypse Now screenplay, and there are a lot of overlaps between Island of Dr. Moreau and Apocalypse Now / Heart of Darkness, so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And Hare also co-wrote Full Metal Jacket, which I just rewatched recently. I think it's a really great movie, the Stanley Kubrick Vietnam War era movie. And then the last co-writer on that initial draft of the screenplay was Waylon Green, who wrote the screenplays for The Wild Bunch, Sorcerer, really classic new Hollywood movies. I don't know what you guys think, but I would love to read the initial draft of the screenplay. With those three writers, I'm sure it was incredible. It sounds amazing.
Well, that's the impression I got, at least, again, watching the Lost Souls documentary, that it was an incredible screenplay, which, of course, just got whittled away and bastardized throughout the process.
Yeah, totally. Because when John Frankenheimer came onto the movie, he demanded a rewrite by his frequent collaborator, Ron Hutchinson. Hutchinson had worked with Frankenheimer on The Burning Season and Against the Wall. I'm not saying that I'm an expert on Frankenheimer movies, but I feel like it's a bad sign that I have not heard of those two movies. Like, maybe that's not the best things that they made. So, yeah, it seems like the rewritten screenplay, definitely not as good as the initial draft, not to mention the fact that, like, they were rewriting it throughout the entire process of the production. So, just the screenplay was a total mess on this movie.
Mm-hmm. And you had actors who constantly questioned it, like Val Kilmer. And you had actors like Brando who constantly wanted to throw his own ideas into the movie, some of which made it in, some of which did not, like the dolphin subplot.
Yeah. Yeah, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, maybe I won't give it all away right now, but definitely watch that Lost Soul documentary where they talk about that a little bit. Marlon Brando had this crazy idea that Dr. Moreau would in fact would at least think that he was becoming a dolphin, was like in the process of transforming into a dolphin during like the story of the film, which is, and there's one scene that kind of like alludes to that a little bit, but it's not explained at all in the movie. It's nuts. It's really, really funny. It's crazy. Just a couple other crew members to talk about here real quick. The editor was Paul Rubel, who worked on some really good movies, or maybe not really good movies, but at least the editing was good in them. Blade, The Insider, The Cell, so like a pretty accomplished editor. I just wanted to say his name because I feel like he had a very difficult task ahead of him to whip this movie into shape, you know?
Good point.
Does anybody want to talk about Stan Winston? He's such a huge name in the monster movie field, a very well-known name. So yeah, if anybody else wants to talk about him, you're welcome to do so.
Well, you had noted in the notes here that he had just completed Congo, and yeah, unfortunately, I would say his work here is probably closer to what he did on Congo than on like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 and some of the more beloved stuff that he did. But
yeah,
he's all-time great special effects man. It's definitely not some of his best work.
Yeah. Looking at his filmography today, I realized like he did do a lot of amazing work and worked on some really incredible films. But like in the mid 90s, he had kind of a rough run of just like kind of poorly received movies. Shortly after this, he worked on The Relic, which we've talked about on the podcast before, which has pretty good special effects, but sort of like this one, those creature effects and makeup effects are kind of combined with really terrible mid 90s CGI. And I feel like that kind of brings down Winston's work a little bit, unfortunately.
I wonder if he just after Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park, if he was like so in demand that he just got like spread really thin or something. Because it is bizarre that he did such great work on those movies in like the early 90s and then seemed to kind of fall off just a few years later.
Yeah. And like, I wonder too if maybe it became like his company took over some of that work and it became a little bit more of like an assembly line thing with a lot of employees. And maybe the work kind of suffered a little bit for that reason. But that being said, there are some kind of cool, I don't know if it's suitmation exactly, but there's some kind of cool creature effects in Island of Dr. Moreau. One of the good things about it, I would say, here and there.
I agree with that. I think some of the CGI though is laughable even by mid 90s standards. There's like a scene where there's a bunch of rats on a boat that just seemed like, how did this make it into the final cut? This this is like an Animaniacs segment here.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like it just would have been way more difficult to have like the fleeting moments of CGI in this movie than to just have an actor wearing a suit, like jumping from one tree to the next, Like, why wouldn't you just do that? It would look better than what you have in this movie, but.
Or at least not, it would look just as silly, but just better because it's practical.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly. That's how I feel about it. One of countless bad decisions that was made during the production of this movie. I don't know how much you guys know about this producer, Edward R. Pressman, but just doing a little bit more research about him, he sounds like a pretty fascinating guy. He gave a lot of young filmmakers some of their early starts, including Brian De Palma on Sisters and Phantom of the Paradise, the latter of which is amazing. I love Phantom of the Paradise. Pressman also produced Blue Steel, an early Catherine Bigelow movie. He produced Bad Lieutenant by Abel Ferrara, which in my opinion is not a great movie, but kind of helped bring Abel Ferrara to a little bit more recognition. So you would think that Pressman would be a good choice to, work with Richard Stanley, give him an opportunity for this like bigger exposure movie. But even Pressman's backing couldn't come through in the end on this one. And then I just kind of list a couple executive producers here that worked on Island of Dr. Moreau. Tim Zinnemann and Robert Shea, who is then the head of New Line Cinema, are just some of the names that I put down here. I think in that Lost Soul documentary, they also mentioned Mike DeLuca, some other names. And I just think that's relevant because the producers of this movie played such a decisive role in the finished product in terms of the chaotic production that we'll talk about soon, the personnel changes. It's a case study in how just like Hollywood studio filmmaking really played a decisive role in the finished product. Obviously not in a good way in this case.
Yeah. They had a lot of decisions to make, and ultimately that's the job of the producer. They're making those decisions. They're not worried about the creativity, the creative vision. They have a bottom line. They have a product to sell, at least in this case. And yeah, you see how it played out.
Yeah. Yeah, and sort of like we briefly mentioned before, that's not necessarily to throw them under the bus. They probably did have good reasons for thinking that Richard Stanley might not be able to handle this project, but it did not end well despite those reservations.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we should dive into the production backstory of this movie, which, like we mentioned, is so convoluted, so chaotic, it's going to take up probably the bulk of this episode, but it's fascinating. It's just so entertaining to me to find out about the making of this movie. And we'll talk a little bit about the cast of the film too, which was equally difficult to bring together in the finished version.
Okay, go for it.
All right, so I'll start it off just because that's the way I happened to write the Google Doc here, but we'll kind of trade off here and talk about the backstory here. So Richard Stanley had dreamed of making Island of Dr. Moreau into a movie since he was a child, since he was like 4 years old. He always loved this book. And once he got a little bit of clout behind him with the movies that we mentioned before, Hardware and Dust Devil, he started working on this project even before he had the rights to the novel and before he had any kind of producer backing him. He started making storyboards, he started envisioning what the story would be like. So he spent years working on this movie before there was ever a chance that he would actually be able to make it. His initial vision, we kind of talked about this briefly before, but was significantly darker than the version that finally made it to the screen. Again, I haven't read that screenplay. We see the storyboards a little bit in that Lost Soul documentary, but they look really fascinating, just like dark and violent and kind of twisted, very sexual. Would have been a pretty amazing movie. So a chance meeting brought Richard Stanley to Edward R. Pressman, and that led to New Line Cinema greenlighting The Island of Dr. Moreau. I think in that Lost Soul documentary, Stanley mentions that he met Pressman on a bus in London, and that's kind of how the green light came about, which is kind of crazy to think that that's how this insane, like, chaotic production started. Again, Richard Stanley's initial vision was quite different than what made it to the screen. He initially wanted Jürgen Prochnow to play Dr. Moreau, and in that early vision, that would have been kind of like a new age cult leader, long-haired, sort of Charles Manson-ish almost character. But instead of Jürgen Prochnow, New Line Cinema somehow got Marlon Brando attached, and that's kind of when the troubles of the production began on Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, Marlon Brando. I mean, arguably the greatest actor of the 20th century, at least on film and at least in the Western world. I'm not going to go on about Marlon Brando. I'm a big fanboy. When I was getting into acting in high school, I've seen all of his classic movies. So another reason why I've long wanted to watch this movie, because his reputation kind of took a really big hit in the 70s onward. But anyways, shortly into that pre-production, we're going back to Richard Stanley now. Richard Stanley learned that with all these changes that he had been replaced by Roman Polanski, which I'm like, I kind of would love to see that movie too. Yeah. Polanski's version.
Yeah, man, that would have been very twisted for sure. Very dark.
Yeah, no shade to Stanley there, but this is so bizarre. Richard Stanley was a practicing Wiccan, or he was really into witchcraft at the time. Maybe he still is now, I don't know. But at the time, so much so that upon learning of Polanski's involvement, he visited a warlock friend of his, and that's his words. And as he's quoted, is Stanley's featured speaker in the documentary, Richard Stanley says, quote, "Knowing that the odds were against me, I resorted to witchcraft." And it's just, I mean, whether you believe in this stuff or not, it did maybe get Richard Stanley back in the director's chair, and it got Marlon Brando on board, because Brando was surprisingly sympathetic to Richard Stanley. This is some weird trivia. I'm just going to read this verbatim so I don't mess it up. So Richard Stanley's great-grandfather was the legendary African explorer Sir Henry Morton Stanley, who was one of the inspirations for the character of Captain Kurtz in Heart of Darkness and, of course, the film adaptation Apocalypse Now. Brando was still fascinated by this character who he had played in Apocalypse Now and Richard Stanley's connection to it. So all the Venn diagrams are coming together here. All this points back to the surprising connection between H.G. Wells's Island of Dr. Moreau and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which were published 3 years apart in 1896 and 1899, respectively. Both books concern white characters who venture into the, quote, heart of darkness and discover mad explorers driven insane by their isolation and God complex. Wells and Conrad had actually been friends, but the friendship ended when Wells accused Conrad of ripping off his story, and this feud lasted the rest of their lives. I just want to insert, I've read both books. I think I don't draw those connections more deeply than just like, okay, two white guys with a God complex in the jungle. Mm-hmm. I think they're very different stories. But then again, I haven't read Heart of Darkness in a while, so I might stand corrected. But anyways, Marlon Brando insisted he would only make this movie if Richard Stanley stayed on. So New Line, who were skeptical of Richard Stanley for being artsy and eccentric and insular, they stuck with their director. I'll also mention that Brando at this time in the 90s was certainly a name, but he wasn't box office. He wasn't going to fill the seats. So that's why they needed someone else. That someone else eventually became Val Kilmer, but not at first. Not at first. So I'll pass the baton over to Frank there.
Yeah, so Bruce Willis got recruited to play Edward Pendrick, the UN negotiator who's brought to the island after his plane crash. And James Woods was cast as Montgomery, who's Moreau's chief assistant. So with that cast in place, they started on the pre-production. Richard Stanley was working with Stan Winston on the creature designs. They were preparing sets and scouting out shooting locations. But as they were doing that, Bruce Willis had to drop out, possibly due to marital difficulties he was having with Demi Moore at the time, and they did indeed get divorced, I think, a couple of years after that. So Bruce Willis got replaced by Val Kilmer, who was at the height of his stardom then because he had just been in Batman Forever. But Kilmer caused problems right away because he was demanding that his shooting schedule be cut by 40%. So the kind of ingenious solution that Richard Stanley had for this was to switch his role to Montgomery instead of the lead. So by doing that, they had to kick James Woods off of the film. And, they probably regretted that pretty quickly. So to replace someone in that lead role, they brought in Rob Morrow from the TV show Northern Exposure. I don't know if he has any other significant credits. He's a guy who I recognize, but I never really watched Northern Exposure, so I don't know that I've ever actually seen him in anything.
I know I've seen some episodes of that show. When I was looking at his filmography recently, I feel like he was he was never the lead in an extremely well-known movie. I feel like maybe he was a supporting actor in some moderately successful movies from the early 90s, but that's all I really was able to see in his filmography there.
Yeah.
So I don't know him all that well either. As we'll find out, he did not last long on this production. Well, after all that, it's probably a good time for our sponsor break. Which seems a little bit anticlimactic, but here we go. Camp Kaiju is sponsored by Zach Linder and the Zach Pack, powered by Coldwell Banker Realty, your source for real estate, home rehab, fixing and flipping for investor clients, and residential buyers. Reach out to the Zach Pack today for real estate services, follow the Zach Pack on social media, and contact the Zach Pack for investment opportunities. Link in the show notes. Vincent, do we have any correspondences from Mina's mailbox today?
Yeah, we do have a few, and I just want to shout out our patrons. I see you. I see your comments. They're just so good that I want to give time to discuss them. And unfortunately, with this jam-packed episode, I just wanted to pick a briefer comment. But this is from a new subscriber named Lita on YouTube, and she says of Dracula's Daughter, "Hi, new subscriber here. Thanks for good content." And then she has a string of emojis: heart eyes, star eyes, red heart, black heart, vampire, and then 3 bats. So I love that because Dracula's Daughter, it's an older movie. Maybe not as many people listen to that episode as some other episodes, but we got a lot of positive feedback from Dracula's Daughter. So I just want to shout out our listeners who really appreciated that conversation with Naomi.
Yeah, thank you, Lita. It's great.
Yeah. Peter Lorre, he's around here somewhere. Is he still crashing at your place, Matt?
He vanished, much like Richard Stanley at the airport in Australia. I don't know where he went. He's probably at a retreat somewhere around here. Who knows? Eating his bucket of fish heads, though, I'm sure.
I would love to see what kind of retreat he's going to for long deceased horror stars.
Probably just the bottom of a well somewhere. That's what he means by retreat.
Oh, well, wherever he's at, he has recorded a segment for us for the Poverty Row Picture Show, a movie called Spooks Run Wild from 1941. That sounds made up, but it's a fun movie actually, with Bela Lugosi and the East End Kids. And there's another dwarf actor in that actually named Angelo Rossito. So just a coincidence there. We're featuring 2 movies with smaller, shorter than average actors. So Peter, take it away.
Welcome to Poverty Row Studios, on the other side of Hollywood, where the stars were dimmer and the red carpets dripped with blood. Together we will watch the best of the worst. Movies known for their limited budgets, outlandish concepts, and questionable performances. But with enough haunted houses, zombies, ape men, and devil bats to keep you up at night. This is the Poverty Row Picture Show. I dare you to sleep through these nightmares. I am your host, Peter Lorre, You may know me from such horror pictures as Arsenic and Old Lace and Tales of Terror. The later of which I co-star with fellow creatures of the night, that villainous Vincent Price and Basil Skull and Crossbones Rathbone. I recently met up with my blood-curdling colleagues at a secret retreat for long-dead horror icons. No, I swore an oath to keep our antics under wraps, but I can tell you, I have never seen anyone tear up a dance floor like Boris Karloff after one too many. But listeners, it is good to be back in my own room, in Matthew's home. He even had a bucket of fish heads waiting for me. He is a hell of a guy. Oh, as for Pierre, he is taking some time off, but remember those lilacs he so thoughtfully left me? Yes, they are thriving beyond my wildest dreams. I came home to find them as tall as I, and oh, what is this? Listeners, there is a strange light emanating from the leaves. I turn off the light and they glow in the dark. I do not know what this is all about, but I will put this out of my mind for now as I turn to reviewing this week's Poverty Row picture, Spooks Run Wild, starring Bela Lugosi and that gang of grotesque teenagers, the East End Kids. Now, this picture finds the kids solving the mystery of the, quote, monster killer as they spend the night in a countryside haunted house. Hijinks abound as the kids run into cobwebs, suits of armor, and secret passageways. Lugosi plays the supposed monster along with his dwarf sidekick. Now, how does this story of hilarious suspense end? You will have to see for yourself. The last time we saw the East End Kids on the Poverty Row Picture Show was the odious Boys of the City, rife with racist jabs at the lone black actor of the troupe, Sunshine Sammy Morrison. How does Mr. Morrison fare in this outing? I am pleased to say much, much better. The problematic jokes are still there, albeit turned down, and Mr. Morrison appears more confident in his presence in the gang, allowing such teasing to roll off his back. He even gets some good zingers back at his friends. The script is co-written by Carl Foreman, who would go on to write the classics High Noon and The Bridge on the River Kwai. Believe it or not. Now, as for Bela Lugosi, he holds his own and appears to enjoy spoofing his vampire image. The picture was a moneymaker despite mixed reviews, and Monogram decided to reunite Lugosi and the kids in 1943's Ghosts on the Loose, which we will review at a later date. Next time, however, we will discuss a John Carradine picture from PRC entitled Bluebeard. Now, where did I put my planting shears?
Yeah, so glad he's back, by the way. I kind of thought that ended at the end of last season, but I'm glad that he's back.
We couldn't keep him away.
Just when you think he's out. No, that quote doesn't work in this case. Sorry, never mind. You know what I'm getting at, though.
When I was listening to the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms episode the other day, all the stuff about the fish heads in Matt's fridge was making me laugh pretty hard.
And it's true. I cannot get the stench out of my apartment. It's terrible.
Oh, gross.
I love the Peter Lorre thing.
convinced that the thing on this table isn't human. Its cries are human. Do you know what it is, what I began with? No. An animal. Well, we may as well discuss this frankly, now that you know the facts. I wanted to prove how completely she was a woman. I'm not beaten. Get everything ready. For what? This time I'll burn out all the animal in her. I'll make her completely human.
On Dr. Moreau's island, there are 3 rules. Don't drink the water. Don't disturb the natives. And whatever you do, don't feed the animals.
What's going on?
New Line Cinema presents the science fiction event of the summer. Marlon Brando, Val Kilmer, David Thewlis. The Island of Dr. Moreau, directed by John Frankenheimer, rated PG-13. Now playing.
Even before shooting was set to commence, tragedy struck Marlon Brando. His daughter Cheyenne, from his 3rd marriage to a French Polynesian actress named Tarita Terapaya, his daughter Cheyenne committed suicide. Marlon Brando and Cheyenne had an extremely difficult relationship, a very distant relationship, some might say not even really a relationship at all. Marlon Brando did not allow her to visit him in the United States or her brother, his son, with the same wife. And he rarely visited them in Tahiti. I read that Cheyenne sort of idolized Marlon Brando when she was a kid, but then when she got to be a teenager and a young adult, she was a model and an actress and really grew to hate Marlon Brando, and they didn't really have any kind of relationship whatsoever. Regardless of all that, her suicide really sent Marlon Brando into a spiral of depression. He retreated to his private island. He did not communicate with the cast and crew at all. They had no idea if or when he was going to show up to make the island of Dr. Moreau. Even so, shooting did start outside of Cairns in northeast Australia, which that documentary Lost Soul kind of says is like the worst place they could have chosen to shoot this movie. Like, really terrible weather, really remote. They could have found like jungle sort of scenery much more easily than this place. But that is where they shot the film. Tensions were continuing to grow between New Line Cinema and Richard Stanley. Like we've already alluded to, Stanley had some pretty eccentric behavior. He would skip production meetings. He would kind of hole himself up in his bungalow that he rented. He maybe was not always very good at communicating his vision to other people on the project. Some false rumors about Richard Stanley spread. It's hard to say exactly where they came from. There was a story about him climbing a tree after a long day of shooting and refusing to come back down. Pretty much all the cast says that did not happen. That's ridiculous. They never saw that happen. But nonetheless, all these rumors started to grow about this artsy, eccentric young director. But still, even aside from those rumors, the main source of tension was Richard Stanley's inability to handle or tone down Val Kilmer's just kind of diva-ish, really honestly bullying behavior during the production of this movie. Again, he was at the height of his fame after Batman Forever. He arrived to the production 2 days late. He proceeded to be a nightmare to the entire cast and crew, according to pretty much everybody involved with this movie. He would question creative decisions, demand more screen time than his actors. He would demand more screen time than his co-stars and refuse to read the dialogue as written. Sounds like it was pretty bad dialogue, but still, his constant arguing, I'm sure, did not make it better. There was one story, too, in that documentary about how he lit a cameraman's hair on fire as sort of a prank or just like he thought he was being funny or something. So, yeah, really a handful on this movie. He already had a reputation for being a pretty difficult actor, and that reputation was just set in stone after this movie. And honestly, it set him, he was in the A-list firmly at this time. And after Island of Dr. Moreau, that changed pretty quickly, kind of tumbled down the list of Hollywood stars. Much later, Val Kilmer would say that his unruly behavior during the making of this movie was partially a result of the fact that he was also going through marital troubles. He found out through a TV news report that his wife, Joanne Whalley, was divorcing him, and indeed he was served divorce papers very early during the shooting of the movie. So that certainly did not help his already very difficult behavior.
Yeah. I just gotta say that with Brando AWOL, that Richard Stanley lost his main ally in the only reason why New Line was keeping Stanley was because of Brando's insistence. So Stanley was not helped by that. And Matt, I love that you brought up how the shooting location was so remote. It was like an hour on dirt roads from the hotel each day, there and back.
Mhm.
And it's so funny. I think it's the AD that Frankenheimer brought in the documentary. The AD is like, why? This was so poorly chosen. Like, there's jungle everywhere. I walk out my door, there's jungle. Why do we have to drive an hour for more jungle?
Yeah. And Richard Stanley at least brings up like a big landmark that's in the area, like a big mountain that can kind of be like orienting space or whatever. I did not notice that mountain a single time throughout the entire movie. So if that was the reason to shoot there, that does not seem sufficient.
Nope. So adding insult to injury with the location in the jungles of northern Australia, a hurricane hit the production and they had to halt everything for several days. Much of the set was destroyed in a legitimate hurricane. Going back to our witchcraft theme, it's at this point that with Brando and his tragedy, the warlock that Richard Stanley was friends with got into some sort of trouble in England. Richard Stanley's mom's house was struck by lightning multiple times, apparently. There was a sighting of a hyena in Ireland. I'm paraphrasing, but there's a lot of things that happened that seemingly unraveled the magic that was helping Richard Stanley, if you buy into all that stuff. So it just paints Stanley as just a character. I'm not saying he's, an oddball in any disparaging way. Just he had reasons for people to question him, including taking 4 lumps of sugar in his coffee. That was an anecdote from one of the New Line producers.
That didn't seem that weird to me, but he did make a big point of that. Yeah.
I know. Okay. So with all these delays and the tensions, actor Rob Morrow couldn't handle it, and I don't blame him. He called New Line president Robert Shea and demanded to be let go from the role, saying, "I need to be released from my contract." He couldn't stand the problematic shoot any longer, and he was granted that release from his contract. So again, they had to recast the part.
Yeah, and with all of these issues piling up, New Line Cinema abruptly fired Richard Stanley via fax. So he had angrily shredded up, a bunch of his documents after that, just hoping that would kind of be a way that New Line would have to rehire him, since he'd done all this preparatory work for it already. They brought him to the airport to try to send him back to Hollywood, but he vanished and no one knew where he was for a while after that. So New Line offered him his full fee. They offered to pay him his full fee for the work, even though he didn't complete it and only shot, I think, for about a week, provided that he stay quiet about the firing and the circumstances surrounding it and didn't criticize the production publicly. But after he disappeared, of course, New Line was worried that he would sabotage the film. And there's kind of a funny story about that I'm sure we'll get into later. But essentially what happened is he, at least for a little while, went to a secluded retreat to recover and just try to, I guess, kind of get his mind right after being kicked off of the Dream project. And I guess didn't leave his room for weeks. So, of course, a lot of people who were working on the movie were sympathetic to him, were interested in his vision. And so they were angry when he was fired. Fairuza Balk was particularly mad about it. She was arguing with the executives on the set. She had someone actually drive her all the way across Australia to the other side of Australia because she was planning to fly back, and she was telling her agent that she, just did not want to do this anymore if Stanley was not involved. But they told her that her career would be ruined if she broke her contract, and that she'd, basically never work in Hollywood again. So, against her wishes, she wound up returning to the set.
She's a very compelling person in that Lost Soul documentary, I think. It's kind of like touching in a way to see her stand up for Richard Stanley. They kind of seem to have like a shared vision for the movie. So
Yeah.
it's obviously unfortunate. But Richard Stanley's gone. He was fired. So the New Line Cinema brought in John Frankenheimer, like we mentioned before, to act as replacement director. Frankenheimer was very eager to work with Marlon Brando, as was pretty much everybody else on this movie, even though he had kind of had his, controversies, I guess, over the last 10 or 15 years. He was kind of already a notorious, like, eccentric, I guess you would say. Still, everybody wanted to work with him, so Frankenheimer came on board. He did receive a huge salary and arranged a 3-picture deal from New Line Cinema for his services. Probably he knew that this was not going to be a very easy job, so he tried to work it to his advantage, which he was pretty much able to do. Again, Frankenheimer was kind of a relic of the kind of classical Hollywood moving into New Hollywood era. So he was one of those gruff, tyrannical directors who would bark out orders, kind of act as like a military commander on set. That could not have been further away from Richard Stanley, but it was equally alienating to much of the cast and crew of the film. Frankenheimer also brought in David Thewlis to replace Rob Morrow in the lead role. Thewlis is kind of interesting. I don't think he really fits this movie very well, and he seems to be in a different movie altogether, but it's kind of interesting to watch that sometimes. And he has very fun, interesting things to say about the movie as well, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. Production was halted for a week and a half as Frankenheimer was brought on board, and these changes and script rewrites were made.
There was a moment in the movie, in the film, Thewlis and Kilmer, I don't know, they're just kind of standing around. Nothing's really happening in the shot. But then the camera cuts to David Thewlis, and he's literally face palming. And I guarantee you he's not acting in that moment. And I laughed out loud so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did feel bad for him watching this movie because he's like, of the main male actors, at least, he's like the one who is like trying to like honor the material and
but by the sorry, Frank, by the end of the movie,
yeah,
I know it's not shot sequentially, but his energy is 100% just get me out of this picture. Like, where's my paycheck?
Yeah,
I need out of here.
Yeah, and I do agree with Matt too that he is kind of miscast in this role. He's like his persona, I guess, to the extent that you could say there's a David Thewlis persona, is more that he's like you expect him to play more like a neurotic character or like kind of a sleazy character. And I think for this role you kind of need someone who's like, a normal guy, like a normal square-jawed guy who's like horrified by all the weirdness around him. But, like I said, he, at least unlike the other major male actors in the movie, seems to be like trying to give a good performance.
Yeah. All right. So same story, same characters, as Matt has titled this section. Shooting soon resumed, but it didn't go any better with Frankenheimer at the helm. New script pages were turned in only a few days before they were shot, and the actors hated the rewrites and often improvised, making up their own characters. Brando did this a lot, and I think some of the most memorable, maybe most interesting parts of this movie is just Brando winging it. And I kind of love it, actually. But behind the scenes, Brando and Kilmer just hated each other. They both behaved erratically. Brando would spend hours in his air-conditioned trailer as the cast would wait for shooting to commence. The extras were wearing full heavy makeup and costumes, and they were sweltering in the tropical heat. So not cool that Brando was acting that way to his cast. But on one occasion, Kilmer and Brando both waited in their trailers, refusing to come out before the other one did. Again, the cast and crew waited for hours as this standoff took place. Some pretty good quotes attributed to this feud. Brando said to Kilmer, "Your problem is you confuse the size of your paycheck with the size of your talent." Kilmer said something about, he asked Brando once, like, "Did you see the reef?" And Brando said, "See the reef? I own a reef. I have reefs coming out of my ass."
I love that quote. I forgot to put it on here. I'm so glad you said that.
More quotes dumping on Val Kilmer. Frankenheimer later said, "I don't like Val Kilmer. I don't like his work ethic, and I don't want to be associated with him ever again. After Kilmer shot his last scene, Frankenheimer reportedly said, "Now get that bastard off my set." And Frankenheimer also said, "Even if I directed a movie about Val Kilmer, I would not cast him." Which I love that quote. There's also a story Fairuza Balk recounts. She went up to Brando one day because they have a scene, and she wanted to like talk about their characters, like good working actors should do. And I'm going to paraphrase, but Brando literally said, "No, I'm not going to do that. Why? Like, who cares? You're getting paid. I'm getting paid. You're beautiful. Like, let's just, who cares? Let's just make it up." Like, just the irony of, like, again, arguably the greatest in his prime, On the Waterfront, Streetcar, even The Godfather later in his career. And he just doesn't give two craps at this point in his life. And I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, he gave so little of a crap about any of it, I guess, that he refused to learn his lines, which I guess was becoming a habit for him from his last few movies prior to this as well. So they actually gave him like a small radio receiver where they could like feed the lines to him, and then he would just recite them on camera. And they mentioned in the documentary that there were like a few incidents where his radio receiver would pick up like something from like CB radios, and he would actually say something that like a trucker said that would be, make
Yes.
no sense in the context of even this crazy performance. And sometimes he even just like ignored whatever he was supposed to say and just made something up, which I'm sure his coworkers loved.
God.
So meanwhile, and this was kind of what I was alluding to earlier, Richard Stanley was still recuperating nearby, and I think he said he was at a bar or something, and he happened to run into some of the people who were working in the movie and who were camping in the area, as they were working as extras. And so he actually got back onto the set as an extra with a Dogman costume. There was a story in the documentary about how, they would take their breaks for lunch or whatever, or probably to wait for Marlon Brando to decide to come out of his trailer. And, it would be like sweltering heat. So everybody else would be taking off their helmets. And that first AD who Vincent had mentioned, I think, is the one who said, like, he noticed this guy with the dog costume on who just, like, wasn't taking the helmet off, even though they're in this, 110-degree heat or whatever. Because obviously he didn't want to reveal his identity and that he was, infiltrating the set.
Ugh,
so
that's hilarious. Like, who's the psycho who keeps his dog mask on?
Yeah. And apparently, in his autobiography, Val Kilmer claims that he could hear Richard Stanley yelling somewhere in the crowd of extras, and he recognized the voice, but because there's so many people running around in all these weird animal outfits, he could never determine who was Richard Stanley. So, and then finally, at the end of filming, when the wrap party came up, Richard Stanley showed up. And apparently Val Kilmer did apologize at that time for behaving so horribly and contributing to getting Richard Stanley fired from the production. So a little bit of a happy ending there, I guess.
Kind of,
yeah. And to defend Brando a little bit, on the documentary, there's a German actor, Marco Haschneider. He's a really interesting character. He plays the character named Milling, very sophisticated beast folk who hangs out with Dr. Moreau. But Hofschneider says that Brando was very gracious on set. On his first day, Brando took time to shake everyone's hand, hoof and claw, because everyone was in costume. And I'm like, that's something. Maybe he was unprofessional in a lot of ways, but I don't know, still gracious in some other ways.
Yeah, I think there's a quote where I think it might have been Hofschneider who says that Brando was at least kind of playful about the fact that he did not care about this movie or the performance at all, whereas Kilmer was like hateful in the ways that he like did not care about this movie or the performance.
And I think
that's kind of
yeah, I think it's so fascinating to me. Like, you see those energies, to me, translate in the performances. I see that Brando doesn't care, but he's having fun. I see that Kilmer doesn't care, but he's really salty about it.
Yeah, especially in the part toward the end after Moreau has died and the Kilmer character is kind of trying to like take his place as like the god of this island or whatever, and he's like doing his Marlon Brando impersonation when he's like sitting on that throne. That it did seem really, it seemed like genuinely mean spirited, which
Yeah.
like could have worked for the performance, except it's also like extremely hammy and just doesn't actually work. But yeah, it seemed like there was some genuine hatred there.
Yeah. That's, I don't know. It just makes me think about acting as like, I don't know. It's just like a transcendent, almost like you can't define it, but people have energies and they bring that to the screen. If you're feeling salty and hateful, well, I guess it comes out.
Yeah, and like Frank said, it kind of works for the character, but it like goes beyond the character too. Like I feel like it becomes pretty obvious that Kilmer's not playing a role. Like that's just what he was at that time of his life, or at least like on set for this movie, you know? And
Yeah.
it's fun to watch Brando's like lunacy basically and like the crazy ideas that he comes up with. One really bizarre story that I forgot to put in the notes, I'm sorry, there's just so much to this backstory, but it was Brando who insisted that Nelson de la Roja, who is a dwarf who is about 2 feet tall, he was cast in the film. He was initially kind of just supposed to be like, a strange looking background extra essentially, but Brando was like, this human person is fascinating. Like everybody's going to be fascinated by this figure. I want him next to me at all times. Like, and that's exactly what happened. Like this dwarf character played by Nelson de la Roja essentially becomes Dr. Moreau's mini-me, and Mike Myers has admitted that that's where he got the idea from. And in Austin Powers, it's a parody of these two characters in The Island of Dr. Moreau. And it's bizarre because like those images with like the two of them together are really striking. They look amazing. Like the scene, Frank kind of made a joke about this earlier, but the scene where they're both playing the piano and Nelson de la Roja character is like on a tiny grand piano that's like above Brando's piano is hilarious. That's my favorite part of the movie.
And that's it. And that was Brando's idea.
Yeah. Amazing. And like it still might not be good in those moments, but it's definitely very entertaining and just like off the walls or off the wall. And then like, once Brando leaves the movie, I think you can tell that it kind of the energy changes a little bit. It just gets kind of draggy, I think, after that point.
Yeah. I feel like it gets reliant on just a lot of set pieces and like let's just crank the action and wrap up this movie as quickly as we can.
Yeah. But not quickly enough, I would say.
No.
Well, not surprisingly after all that, this movie was a notorious bomb when it came out in August 1996. It grossed only $49 million worldwide against a $40 million budget, and that does not include all the marketing and distribution expenses, so in the long run, this movie lost money for New Line Cinema. Do either of you guys want to talk about like the notoriously negative reception it received?
Yeah, Roger Ebert said it was likely Marlon Brando's worst film, which is probably true. Nothing else is coming to mind immediately for that when I think about his other stuff. It got nominated for 6 Razzie Awards, with Brando winning or losing, depending how you look at it, for worst supporting actor. Yeah, it's funny too, because I remember I was thinking about it, at the time in 1996 when I was 12. I would have been reading Entertainment Weekly. I think my mom had a subscription to it, which kind of like sort of unofficially became my subscription to it, just reading it. But so I went back and actually looked at their review of it. They gave it a C+, which I think is a pretty, positive compared to the reception that I got elsewhere. But I thought that was kind of interesting to go back and look at again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that it ever got higher than a C+ from anybody.
I feel like maybe like there have been some retrospective reviews that are like in the so bad it's good, like cult classic sort of territory. But I feel like even recent reviews are like, this just does not work. Like it kind of earns its reputation as a fiasco, But we'll probably talk about in a little bit, there are maybe some redeeming aspects to it, or some fun aspects anyway. Redeeming is a very kind word. But yeah, David Thewlis, he said that he wants to give an exhaustive account of the making of this movie. He would love to tell that story. But he's also said that if he did that, then he would never work in Hollywood again. I think he said that quote a long time ago. It's probably not true anymore, but I think it's kind of funny. He skipped the premiere of the movie, still has never seen the finished film. There's another quote that I did not put on the notes, but Marlon Brando compared the experience of filming the movie to David Thewlis when they were just talking on set one day. Marlon Brando compared it to doing a crossword puzzle while falling down an elevator shaft. Great quote. I love that. Yeah, there are some themes in this movie, even if they're not very successfully delivered.
Well, there's the "Are humans the real monsters" theme, which, as somebody noted here, is basically a theme of just about every monster movie ever made. But yeah, you've got the Moreau character, who's kind of zany echo of Captain Kurtz from Heart of Darkness. Just kind of a guy playing God in a remote locale that kind of brings him back to the origins of humanity. There's that montage late in the movie that I mentioned earlier that tries to reaffirm that theme by showing some real world footage of humans committing atrocities and violence that kind of makes them seem more like beasts than the man-animal hybrids in the movie, perhaps. Were you guys able to identify any of that documentary footage, like what it was from? I wasn't watching it back this time, which I think kind of hurts that scene, actually. I think it would be better if you it just is kind of like vague footage of strife and people punching each other and stuff.
Yeah. It didn't seem up to snuff with, I could have shot that on my phone, I guess. I don't know. It just didn't seem like the same quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so vague that, to your point, Frank, I feel like that point doesn't really land home because it's just humans are terrible. And it's well, I think we need a little more focus and a little more pointedness to that theme, I feel like that's one of the reasons that theme doesn't land very well.
Yeah.
In the book, H.G. Wells actually wrote the book as a satire more than anything on religion and humanity's tendency to seek an all-powerful supreme being. And in the book, it's much more obvious in a good way. Of course, the book's always better than the movie, but in the movie, it was just a scant, almost a throwaway, the David Thewlis character or Kilmer. I don't remember who, but let me just say in the book, the Thewlis character makes it his objective now. I must become their god to replace Moreau for my survival, because they're starting to get out of line and they need that discipline that religion gives people. So yeah, I don't know. It's obviously better in the book. I didn't get much of that in this movie.
Yeah, and I feel like if the theme is that, men are more monstrous than the supposed monsters, or these kind of beastly animal human hybrids, I feel like that also isn't really conveyed because, the society on the island does not get any better when Moreau dies. It immediately descends into chaos, and all these monsters, or I'll just use the word beasts because that's kind of what's used in the movie and that's what they're referred to in the credits. Mm-hmm. They immediately start killing each other. The supposed new god that steps up, is clearly is not trying to lead to a harmonious society or anything like that. So I feel like the movie is not actually, it does not successfully say that men are more monstrous than the beasts, because the beasts are just as bad. And that kind of leads me to believe there's no theme whatsoever. It's kind of just, an action climax without a purpose behind it,
The themes are just, Wells' story is so good that the themes are there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't excuse the lack of diving into them.
Yeah.
It's just okay, well, thank you, H.G. Wells, for writing a great book.
Yeah.
It just goes back to him. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wish I knew what the script revision process was like, because how much did they actually try to take from the Wells novel and how much was it just like, let's end this movie? Like, let's just get it over with, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I wish we kind of had some more insight into that process, which probably was fascinating but depressing, is my assumption. I guess I'll just briefly say that, like, it's unfortunate, again, going back to that ostensible theme that, like, men are the real monsters. You know, I feel like the actual villain at the end of the movie is this character of Azazello, who's one of Dr. Moreau's sons, so one of these beastly hybrids. And it's just really unfortunate, I think, that this character is like visually the darkest one of all of them. He has the darkest skin, and like he even has dreadlocks, and I feel like he's kind of coded to be a black character, and he kind of becomes the villainous monster at the end. But then conversely, the most cultured of Dr. Moreau's kids are the Fruzabal character, Aisa, who's kind of like this Catwoman, and then Maling, who we talked about before, played by Marco Hofschneider, who quotes Shakespeare and like talks about political theory. And it's really disturbing, honestly. I feel like there are some maybe unintentional, but still kind of racist representations where, you know, the villain ends up being like the darkest monster character, but like the lighter skinned ones are the most cultured and civilized. It's a really unfortunate racial representation that, unfortunately, I think has been common in American movies throughout much of its history. Maybe getting a little better recently, but still a thing in the mid 90s, you know? I don't know if either of you guys picked up on that. Maybe it's unintentional, but I did not like it very much.
I did not, but I think you make valid points.
Yeah, same here. That didn't really occur to me watching it, but yeah, seeing it written out like that and hearing you say it, that is definitely there. So.
Yeah. And I think also it just, again, weakens that theme of like the men are the real monsters, because the climax of the movie is not really representing that is not really representing that at all. So the movie fails if it's trying to deliver that theme, I think.
Yeah. Is it okay if I move on?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Sensationalism and exploitation. Matt, you wrote this note that I think is fair because we have the actor Nelson de la Roja, who at the time was the world's shortest man. He was a celebrity in the Dominican Republic. He was on TV. He made music, but you wouldn't know that. And I don't, being on this set, I think he was just viewed, De La Roja, as a freak of nature, for lack of a better word. Marlon Brando took him under his wing, so to speak, and like wanted to feature him by his side with more screen time. And on the one side, you could say, wow, that's really great. Brando's given this guy a lot of screen credit. But there's something about it that's just really kind of icky. Like Brando, because Brando at this time, he's an eccentric. And he probably, I don't know, I got the sense that he viewed De La Roja as more of a toy than a human being. So I did get that vibe too with Nelson de la Roja's portrayal in this film.
Yeah, and I think in the Lost Soul documentary, some of the crew members were, when Marlon Brando was like, oh, this person needs to be in like every shot of the movie. And they were like, well, he doesn't speak English. Like, he's not an actor. Like, I just don't think we can do that. And also the character, who does have a name. I think Mahai is the character's name. Majai, something like that. But anyway, this character took numerous scenes away from the Maling character. Like, Maling was supposed to be a pretty major supporting character in the movie, and that's not how it wound up, because then Marlon Brando wanted Mahai, or Nelson de la Roja, to take, Maling's place in all those scenes. So, but, when Marlon Brando was told, like, oh, he's not an actor, he doesn't speak English, Brando was just like, oh, it's fine. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need any dialogue. He just needs to be there, basically.
Yeah, as a prop,
yeah,
which,
exactly.
Is dehumanizing.
Right. I am a little, like, it's certainly unfortunate. And also, I think most of the scenes with Moreau and Mahai next to each other are extremely entertaining. And, like, the images are extremely striking. So I'm a little conflicted to say this, but it's not great,
No, I agree. I mean, again, what Brando's doing, I think, is what draws me to this movie, for better or for worse.
Yeah. I guess just real briefly, I'll say that I think the only scene in the movie that actually is intentionally good, that works the way that it's supposed to, is when Hyena Swine, who's one of the Beast characters, and some of the other hybrids like go into Moreau's compound basically to kill him. And they basically ask him like, what are we? Like, what are you? Are you our father? Are you our god? Please explain our existence. And Moreau's not able to do that. And then they kill him immediately afterwards. Like, I think maybe that's the only scene in the movie that works as it is intended to. And it works fairly well, I think.
I like that you brought up that scene. I might add a touch of camp for me when they rip off Marlon Brando's arm, which was such a shocking moment of violence, of like, you could see it. I said to Ellen, I wish they had just ripped his head off. I don't know, like, why? I wish they had just gone the full Monty and just like totally eviscerated Marlon Brando in front of us.
It would not have been out of place in this movie. Like, nothing seems like it would be off limits here,
All right, that's all I got.
Cool. Frank, is there anything else you want to say in that thematic category?
No, I think I'm probably ready to do the breakdown if you guys are.
Cool. Let's do it. As always, on Camp Kaiju, we have the good, the bad, and the campy. Frank, do you want to start off with the good stuff?
Yeah, so when I first started rewatching this, I was actually thinking it was like a pretty decent movie for the first half hour or so. I think it's like the 30-minute mark when Marlon Brando first shows up. And even like, I thought it set a pretty decent ominous tone leading up to that. I actually kind of like the scene with David Thewlis and the two other guys who are on the life raft together, who are just like, brutally like killing each other to try to survive. It's like very bombastic and like kind of ridiculously over the top in terms of like how just aggressive the editing is and everything in it, but it kind of sets a tone right away of, just this is going to be like a weird, unsettling time kind of. And then also I think the first appearance of Brando, even though he, looks ridiculous, like he looks like he's like coated in flour or something, but when he first shows up and he's got like the big dark glasses on and everything, and he's living in this like this weird alternative society on this island, kind of reminded me of like Jonestown, like, which I don't know if that was an intentional illusion or anything, but I thought that was kind of effectively creepy because any like old photos or footage you see of Jim Jones, he's usually got the glasses on too. And it was just kind of giving me that vibe, and I don't know if the filmmakers intended that at all. It probably was just kind of like a happy accident, but I thought that was kind of effectively unsettling. And then, as soon as he starts talking and stuff, the movie just gets like ridiculously campy and kind of completely goes off the rails from there. But I do think it starts off pretty well.
Yeah, I would agree.
Sorry.
All right. No, go ahead. After you.
Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Oh, what do I have here? What do I have? Let's see. No direction, bad acting, makeups. Okay, I like the makeup. As I said before, I love the actor who plays the hyena swine, who kind of becomes the leader of the beast folk. Guys, I thought that was Ron Perlman the whole time, and I was sorely disappointed that it wasn't. But, again, I don't want to take away from the actor who played the hyena swine. I think he understood the assignment and just goes off the wall crazy, I guess, as a hyena would. So I really enjoyed his performance.
Daniel Rigney is his name, just so
Daniel Rigney. He doesn't even have a Wikipedia page.
Right? Yeah, he's great.
But like, he should be a star. And that's all I have. Makeup and Daniel Rigney.
I feel like I'm a little closer to Frank. I think maybe I actually do like some things about this movie. I think it's like fairly engaging at first. The opening credits are really bombastic and over the top, but I kind of like them. I think they set the tone. The music's kind of bad, but still sort of fun. I think there are some moments of visual style. There's like one kind of low angle shot at night when David Thewlis is walking down like a courtyard in like Moreau's complex, and like a fan is whirring in the background. I was like, oh, this is a very like mysterious image. I was kind of surprised by that. And then just a couple other close-ups that I thought were kind of striking. Certainly the moment when Marlon Brando first appears. It straddles a fine line between like visual style and just like way over the top bombast. But either way, it's like interesting to look at. So I think that stuff kind of goes away at some point in the movie. It gets less visually interesting as it goes on. But I would agree with Frank. Initially, I think it at least is kind of fun to watch, and there's a certain atmosphere that's built up for a while.
Yeah.
But there is probably a lot more that's bad about this movie than good, and we've already talked about a lot of it. I'll just real quick start off, and then you guys can take it from there. But I think, like at least it's like entertainingly bad and like nuts for a while. But I think like the last 20 minutes maybe, when you just have the beasts fighting each other and like it becomes muddled what the themes are, I think the movie actually starts to get surprisingly boring at that point. And I was like, let's go back to like the insane, crazy stuff, That's my big bad stuff about the movie for the bad category.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even though this is not a very long movie, it's only a little over an hour and a half. The big like action climax does seem like it's going on forever. It reminded me, I just recently the movie Mickey 17 that's out in theaters, and that has a climax that it feels to me like it's like the length of a regular movie. The big action scene at the end, and that's kind of how I felt in this one, even though it probably only goes on for like 20 minutes. But yeah, it just seems like, the movie gets totally lost in these just like shoddy effects and explosions and things, and doesn't really recover from there.
Yeah. My big criticism that I haven't mentioned is I think the makeup is so good and visually interesting that I found it upstaging the action, like the actual scene that was happening. Because there was a moment, I don't know, it was Val Kilmer, David Thewlis, and Nelson De La Roja is on the hood of a car, like right beside them. And his makeup is so gross and weird. But like the way the shot is, or the blocking is the actors are blocked and the shot is composed. I'm like, yeah, you guys are talking. I don't really care about your dialogue. Look at this weirdo. And I was like, my focus shouldn't be pulled the way it is right now. And I just found the makeup upstaging the things we should actually care about in any given scene.
I had the same exact experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that exact moment you're talking about, but there's one part where the Nelson De La Roja character is just like randomly naked for like no apparent reason.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was like, like you say, it probably did pull focus from whatever was going on in that scene, because I don't even remember what was going on at that time. But it is like an effectively kind of unnerving detail, I would say.
Yeah. That's it. I have a lot of campy stuff.
Yeah, I feel like most of this movie is camp in a way. One example, so when we were talking about the Nelson De La Roja character kind of like distracting from the main plot or the themes or whatever, one example of that is extremely campy, so maybe I'll just start off with that example. It's when Moreau and Mahai, the Nelson De La Roja character, are like sitting side by side at the dinner table, like in that dinner scene, and they're just about to start like a supposedly deep conversation about like ethics and science and all this stuff. But then it's interrupted because Mahai has like his feet on the table, and Marlon Brando's like, "Don't do that. Get your feet off of there." And it's ridiculous. It's hilarious. And like, I couldn't think about anything else in that scene after that moment. That to me is the campiest moment and one of my favorite parts of the movie.
Yep. Clear improv. Yeah. Not good improv.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much anything Marlon Brando does in this movie is campy. It is, like Vincent's saying, it is entertaining on some level, but everything he does basically destroys any chance that the movie has of like actually being scary or disturbing or anything.
Yeah.
Because he clearly just like wasn't taking it seriously, was just kind of there to, indulge in whatever whims he had at the moment, and that's entertaining on some level, but yeah, definitely doesn't make for a cohesive movie.
Yeah.
No, just yeah, absolutely. So right off the bat with this movie, the campiest thing happened, and I forgot about it. 100 minutes later, there's a shark attack right at the top of this movie. Do you guys remember the sharks?
Yeah.
I forgot about it till right now, but
I
now
know, but it's shot like like a bad shark attack movie, and it's just so funny. I was like, okay, we're in for a ride. What else? Those boat rats those are really bad. All right, yeah, that's all I got. I mean, everything Brando does, but shark attack is my campy note.
right off the bat, yeah. I did also want to point out one line, excuse me, that Val Kilmer says. It's in a scene where like the beasts are having an orgy and they're all like high on some kind of drug because Val Kilmer has been like pumping them full of drugs throughout some of the movie. And right before he dies, Val Kilmer says, I think the line is, I want to go to dog heaven, which is a really ridiculous line of dialogue. And the way he delivers it is, of course, over the top and ludicrous. So I love that moment as well. All right. I think we've arrived at the point of Camp Kaiju where we give each film a rating. Our 4 ratings here on Camp Kaiju are: number 1, it's a timeless classic. It definitely stands the test of time. Number 2, there may be some antiquated moments, but overall it's great. It stands the test of time. Number 3, it may be historically significant or just fun, but it does not stand the test of time. And our lowest rating, it is not worth revisiting. It definitely does not stand the test of time. Vincent, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that this movie is bad, but I don't think it's boring. So I'm going to give it the second lowest rating. Is that right? It does not stand the test of time, but it has some fun moments. I don't think it's as bad or as unwatchable as you may be led to believe. I think Marlon Brando is pure camp in this movie. And there are some visuals that, again, whether they're bad or not, they're going to stick with you. So, yeah, 1996, Island of Dr. Moreau. Check it out for the morbidly curious among you.
Yeah, I'm 100% with everything Vincent said there. I agree with that rating too. Maybe historically significant or just fun, but doesn't stand the test of time. It's definitely, yeah, I don't think it's anywhere near one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's too bizarre, has too many like individual striking moments, to be like a waste of time. But it definitely does not like work in any way at the same time. It's a huge mess. You could tell that whatever chaos happened behind the scenes that we went into great detail on here shows up on the screen, I think, which is interesting. It gives it an interesting effect. But yeah, definitely did not like it as much as I did when I was 12.
Yeah, 100% agree with both of you guys. If I had seen it when I was 12, I probably would have loved it, but it does not stand the test of time. But yeah, it is fun. It's entertaining throughout much of the running time, if not in the end. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but I would rather have a movie that's interestingly bad than just boring and forgettable. And this movie is not forgettable at all. It is not boring for most of its running time, and it's a case study in just like how quickly a Hollywood production can fall apart. And that's, like you said, Frank, is pretty fascinating to watch. That was great. Thank you again, Frank, for joining us. Always a pleasure. We will see all of you out there next time on Camp Kaiju for Invaders from Mars. Hopefully we'll see some of you at Trivia on May 5th at Indeed Brewing. Getting tired, sorry. Thank you for hanging out, friends. Please rate and review wherever you listen. You can also share this podcast with a friend, subscribe to the website, and send us listener comments at campkaiju@gmail.com or on Instagram. Links are in the show notes. If you'd like to be a featured voice on the show, leave a voicemail at 612-470-2612, telling us about your favorite monster movies and memories. Please check out our website, campkaijupodcast.com, for more information. Camp Kaiju was recorded in Minneapolis, St. Paul, with Menia's Mailbox music by Ben Cook Phelps. Thanks, friends, and until next time, stay campy. Camp Kaiju is sponsored by Zach Linder and the Zach Pack, powered by Coldwell Banker Realty. Your source for real estate, home rehab, fixing and flipping for investor clients and residential buyers. Reach out to the Zach Pack today for real estate services. Follow the Zach Pack on social media and contact the Zach Pack for investment opportunities. Link in the show notes.
Well, things didn't work out. Moreau wanted to turn animals into humans and humans into gods. But it's instinct and reason. What's instinct to a dog?
To hunt, to kill, master. To run back.
I want to go to dog heaven.